You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have the top global news stories for you. Let's get started with our big focus. Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un today signed a new partnership that includes a vow of mutual aid if either country is attacked. And crucially, Kim has vowed full support for Russia's war in Ukraine. This summit comes at a time when both countries face escalating standoffs with the West. The deal, which the leaders say covers areas including security, trade, investment and cultural and humanitarian ties, could mark the strongest connection between Moscow and Pyongyang since the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Both leaders described it as a major upgrade of their ties. This is Putin's first visit to North Korea in 24 years, and the timing is significant. The US and its allies have repeatedly expressed concerns over an arms arrangement under which the North provides Moscow with desperately needed munitions for its war in Ukraine in exchange for economic assistance and technology transfers that could enhance the threat posed by Kim's nuclear weapons and missile program. Kim said the new deal is the strongest ever treaty between the two nations, putting the relationship at the level of an alliance. Putin said it's a breakthrough document, reflecting a shared desire to move relations to a higher level. Kim has also called Russia the most honest friend and ally and referred to Putin as the dearest friend of the Korean people. The North Korean leader gave Putin a grandiose welcome with red carpets, red roses, the guard of honor at the tarmac. Kim received him at the airport on Tuesday night. The two leaders shook hands, warmly hugged, and then rode together in a limousine in a massive motorcade that rolled through Pyongyang's brightly illuminated streets, where buildings were festooned with giant Russian flags and portraits of Putin. In the morning, Putin attended a welcoming ceremony complete with pomp and pageantry at the city's main square, filled with tens of thousands of spectators, including children holding balloons and people wearing coordinated t-shirts in the red, white and blue colors of the Russian and North Korean flags. Huge crowds lined up on the streets to greet Putin's motorcade, waving flowers in the two countries' flags. This lavish welcome comes as heavily sanctioned North Korea has been suffering from shortages of food, fuel and power and a depleted economy made much worse by the COVID pandemic. Yet, Pyongyang seems to have spared no cost for this high-profile visit. Putin presented Kim with a Russian luxury Oris car, an admiral's dagger and a tea set. Kim's presents to Putin include artworks depicting the Russian leader. As the talks began, Putin thanked Kim for North Korea's support for his war in Ukraine. He termed it a fight against the imperialist hegemonistic policies of the United States and its satellites against the Russian Federation. Putin hailed ties that he traced back to the Soviet army fighting the Japanese military on the Korean peninsula in the closing moments of World War II and Moscow's support for Pyongyang during the Korean War. Kim said Moscow and Pyongyang's fiery friendship is now even closer than during Soviet times. He said, "I have no doubt it will become a driving force, accelerating the creation of a new multipolar world where no dominant country can wield hegemonic power." Kim has promised full support and solidarity to the Russian government, army and people in carrying out the military operation in Ukraine. Even in the past, Kim has described the war on Ukraine as a just action to protect Russia's interests and blamed the crisis on the US-led West's hegemonic policy. Remember, North Korea is under heavy UN Security Council sanctions over its weapons program, and Russia faces sanctions by the United States and its Western allies over its aggression in Ukraine. US and South Korean officials accused the North of providing Russia with artillery, missiles and other military equipment for use in Ukraine in return for key military technologies and economic aid. Both Pyongyang and Moscow deny this. Along with China, Russia has provided political cover for Kim Jong Un's continuing efforts to advance his nuclear arsenal, repeatedly blocking US-led efforts to impose fresh UN sanctions on the North over its weapons tests. Now, this is a visit the West is watching closely and with concern. In Washington, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Putin's visit to North Korea illustrates how Russia tries in desperation to develop and strengthen relations with countries that can provide it with what it needs to continue the war of aggression that it started against Ukraine. According to a recent report by a South Korean spy agency's think tank, the North may also seek to increase labor exports to Russia and other illicit activities to gain foreign currency in defiance of UN Security Council sanctions. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula are at their highest point in years, with the pace of Kim's weapons tests on the one hand and combined military exercises involving the United States, South Korea and Japan on the other intensifying in a tit-for-tat cycle. Let's now take a closer look at what Putin said during his summit with Kim. He has called for the indefinite restrictive regime inspired by the US and its allies at the UN Security Council towards North Korea to be reviewed. He stated that the comprehensive partnership agreement signed by the two countries provides mutual assistance in the event of aggression. The Russian president highlighted recent statements by the US and other NATO countries about the supply of high-precision, long-range weapon systems, F-16 aircraft and other high-tech weapons for inflicting attacks on Russian territory, as he put it. And Putin added that Russia does not rule out developing military technical cooperation with North Korea. However, despite all the claims of an all-powerful alliance, analysts say this relationship has its limits. It's not just the United States that's concerned. China too has been watching with a worried eye. Analysts argue that when Putin and Kim get together, and if North Korea gets hold of better weapons technology, it frightens US allies in the region, and it worries China too, as it is concerned about an East Asian NATO, because it does not want any more US assets such as warships in the region. Therefore, if Russia gives more technology to the North, it will worry Beijing. China wants to be a global leader. It does not want another Cold War. It wants business with both the United States and Europe, and it does not want to isolate itself from the world in the same way that Russia and North Korea have. A former CIA analyst has said Putin's visit to Pyongyang highlights how two pariah states are cementing their ties despite their isolation from the international community. He goes on to say, I think it's pretty pathetic that Putin has to resort to relying on the 198th ranked economy in the world to help his war effort. Many are terming it a marriage of convenience and a transactional relationship. The question is, what does this new agreement between Russia and North Korea mean? What impact could it have on the war in Ukraine? How worried would the United States and its allies be? Is China too wary of this alliance? Is this a strictly transactional relationship? Or, as some have suggested, are we in fact witnessing a stronger emergence of a Russia, China, North Korea, Iran axis to counteract NATO and an attempt to reshape the world order, which these countries see as being unfairly dominated by the United States?
Russian President Vladimir Putin touched down in North Korea late Tuesday and was warmly embraced by leader Kim Jong Un on the tarmac. Putin's welcome didn't end there. State media footage showed his portraits and Russian flags across Pyongyang, with buildings lit with messages welcoming him to the North Korean capital, where he last visited 24 years ago. The Russian president's trip looks set to reshape decades of Russia-North Korea relations. It comes when both countries face international isolation, and analyst Jenny Town, senior fellow at Washington, D.C.'s Stimson Center, says it should raise alarms about how much Moscow's willing to help the reclusive nuclear-armed state.
They have a common problem, and that is sanctions. And Putin has really been leading what he considers and what he deems the war on the West, and trying to create a multipolar system and sort of upend or create an alternative to a US-led world order.
North Korea stands to gain a lot from this relationship. In the short term, more trade with Russia could cement agricultural cooperation or Russia's willingness to receive North Korean workers again, says Town. But militarily as well, it's a boon for Pyongyang.
Russia is the first country, basically since the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's been willing to offer North Korea, military cooperation. And so this does give North Korea opportunities to upgrade their hardware in their conventional side, as well as their military reconnaissance satellites and their space programs, which Russia has said openly that they'd be willing to do.
And Washington is watching. Pentagon spokesperson Major General Pat Ryder on Tuesday voiced U.S. worries over Moscow's overtures to Pyongyang.
The deepening cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is something that should be of concern, especially to anyone that's interested in maintaining peace and stability on the Korean peninsula.
Ryder also noted that North Korea has been selling arms to Russia. The North's missile and nuclear programs are banned by UN Security Council resolutions. Putin praised North Korea ahead of his arrival for resisting what he said was US economic pressure, blackmail and threats.
I draw attention to the statements by the United States and other NATO countries about the delivery of long-range precision weapons, F-16 aircraft and other high-tech weapons and equipments for strikes on Russian territory. Basically, those are not just statements. It is already taking place. That blatantly violates the international responsibilities that the Western countries took. In this regard, Russia does not rule out the development of military technical cooperation with the DPRK in accordance with the document signed today. Korean friends have a balanced and objective position regarding the settlement in Ukraine. They understand the true and initial reasons of the crisis. Such politics by the Korean leadership once again proves the sovereignty and true independence of the course of policy of the DPRK.
All right, we will dissect this new agreement that has been signed between Russia and North Korea with our panel of experts in just a moment. But before that, a quick break here on Global Lens.
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
One of southern India's largest cities is facing a water crisis in Bengaluru.
Water is constantly not coming. From the past 2 months, we are not having some water also.
The citizens deserve water security at the very least.
We are going office without bath.
The acute water shortage really leading to citizens resorting to use of even private water tankers in multiple areas.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's go across to our guest. Joining me on the show tonight is Ambassador Ashok Sajjanar, former Indian diplomat, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, defense and security expert, and completing the panel tonight is Pathikrit Pain, foreign affairs analyst. Thanks very much and a warm welcome to all my guests for joining me. Ambassador Sajjanar, if I could begin with you. Okay, I'm told we have a problem with Ambassador Sajjanar's link. Therefore, let me start with Pathikrit Pain. Pathikrit, you know, the two sides are claiming that this is a new strategic comprehensive partnership which establishes a new connection between the two sides, which is in fact stronger than the ties that they had even during the Soviet era. And what is significant amongst other things is Kim Jong Un vowing full support to Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, most believe that there is a very clear transaction that's taking place here. Putin desperately needs ammunition to continue fighting his war against Ukraine, and North Korea desperately needs economic assistance. But in your view, what does this new agreement, which they are now labeling as an alliance, actually mean?
See, first of all, Neha, the issue is this. These are the two countries. The commonality has been this typical, terrible Western culture of imposing sanctions, terming certain countries as pariah and evil. And that's one of the reasons why these two countries have converged for a long time. Otherwise, you will see there are not many areas of convergence between North Korea and Russia for several reasons. So let me tell you this. Today, what we can understand, one of the reasons for this show is because the West is very uncomfortable with what's happening. The West is criticizing. The West is saying that you can't be, helping Russia. They have been saying this to Chinese. They've been saying it to North Koreans. Let me break it down in terms of what has been happening for the last 30, 40, 50 years. It has always been the West which has been setting the narrative in terms of who is evil, who is, untouchable, and who is the champion of democracy, champion of free speech. And they use this typical narrative to destroy Libya, destroy Iraq, destroy Syria. And we were always told that this is what they're doing for the greater cause of humanity. Even if they go for bombing and kill, hundreds of thousands, it is for the greater good. We have been fed with these stories for a long time. Then they trigger wars, then they push for regime change, then they interfere in other countries, and then they impose sanctions. They would freeze your foreign exchange reserve as and when they like, and then they'll tell you that they are doing everything because they believe in humanity. The problem is they, if you remember what Dr. S. Jaishankar mentioned, that Europe must come out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. This is coming true. Today, people are no more buying the Western narrative of what is evil and the Western narrative of who is the bad guy. So every time you say that Putin should be, charged with genocide and everything else, war crimes, the same should be applicable to every American president who has been responsible for what they did to Libya and Iraq. And mind you, I may not be a great supporter of Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, but they had a certain kind of a welfare state which was no way worse than what the European countries actually championed for. Frankly speaking, today's issue is this. When you are not neutral in a war between Ukraine and conflict, first of all, Ukraine and Russia, first of all, this is a war, just for the sake of the audience, this is a war which has been pushed into the throat of Russia because you kept on expanding NATO at a time when the World Cold War was over, Warsaw Pact is over, but you have pushed NATO literally into the backyard of Russia, and there has been a conflict which is unfortunate. This is not an era of war, Modi ji has mentioned. Both sides should restrain. But the West is not neutral. They are not asking for, stopping the war. They are not talking about negotiation. They're not talking about ceasefire. They have kept on funding Ukraine to fight a war on their behalf so that the Ukrainians keep on dying for the sake of the Western Europeans and the Americans against Russia, which a war all of them together will not prefer to fight. Now, when you're doing this, and mind you, Russia was a country in the 1990s, wanted to be part of NATO. You have pitted Russia as an enemy. You live in a delusional Cold War era. So when you've done all these things, you have pushed Russia to a corner, then do you have the right to say that why Russia is going to somebody else and seeking weapons? You don't have the right to say that. So that is the issue today. North Korea, Neha, we have always been told is an evil country. And at the same time, It has been, well, I'm sure I'm telling you, Neha, one thing. In the next 5-6 years, as India becomes far more Atmanirbhar, and if you see the kind of Western narrative, the Western media keeps on coming out, that we are fascist, hegemonic, majoritarian, next 5 to 6 years, they'll term as an evil country as well, because we are becoming far more resilient. So this is where I have a problem. I am not a supporter of North Korea, Russia coming together. But the West has no right to criticize for the double standard they have always maintained. They do not want this war in Ukraine to stop, Neha. They want both sides to keep on fighting. As I mentioned in one of your previous programs, they neither want Ukraine to lose nor want Ukraine to win. They want to keep on sustaining the war. So in that kind of a scenario, as a country with a legitimate history, culture, what option have you left Russia with? They do exactly the same thing. And that is why, as a neutral analyst, I see nothing wrong in what they're doing. Unfortunately, it is going to elongate the war. People will die. But who cares? That has been the Western narrative for all the time. That let people die because they have to do something else. Back to you.
Point well taken. You know, you're saying what choice has the West left Russia with than to actually go to countries like China and North Korea. A former CIA analyst, interestingly, has commented it is quite pathetic that Putin has to resort to relying on a country whose economy is ranked 198th in the world to get what he wants to continue his war. I need to take a break. I will come back to you. Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar is also with us, as is Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. We'll continue this conversation on the other side of this quick break.
There are beautiful golf courses, there are well-played golf courses, there are great greens. But I think we are a combination of everything.
Now, because of the nature-friendly atmosphere here, plenty of water, you can hear the birds. So lots and lots of birds live on this golf course.
Every corner you have a different vista. You have the beautiful Sayadri range behind you, and it's just endless. It keeps going on and on and on and on. So I think no matter what floor you are, you're always slapped in the face by this most amazing view that takes your breath away for a second.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now go across to Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar. Ambassador Sajanhar, in the first segment, Patikrit Pine made the point that, you know, the reason why you see countries like North Korea and Russia coming together today is primarily because of, you know, the double standards practiced by the United States and its Western allies, that they put labels such as pariah and evil on certain nations, impose crippling sanctions on them. And let's, for a moment, look at what Putin and Kim said today during the summit in Pyongyang. Putin said, this is a fight against the imperialist hegemonic policies of the US and its satellites against the Russian Federation. Kim said, I have no doubt this will become a driving force, accelerating the creation of a new multipolar world where no dominant country can wield hegemonic power. They were referring to the new partnership the new agreement that they have inked. The question is, apart from the obvious transactions where Russia needs ammunition from North Korea and North Korea needs economic assistance as well as Russia's help with its weapons and nuclear program, is this battle against what they perceive an imperialist West the primary glue that's bringing these nations together?
Neha, you've suddenly gone mute. I just couldn't hear anything you said beyond a point. I'm sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you at
Can
all.
you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
Okay, so we'll try and fix the link with you.
I don't know what's gone wrong.
Okay, we'll try and fix the link with you. If I could take that question to Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. Sir, I hope I was audible to you.
Yes, Neha, you were. At the very outset, let me tell you, it's a catch-22 situation. We've seen over the years the kind of relationship that China had with Russia. We've seen now in the Ukraine war that despite the entire West led by US assisting Ukraine, fighting with the Russians probably thought that it wouldn't take more than a month for them to neutralize Ukraine. It hasn't. The war's into the third year. You can well imagine just one country fighting an entire NATO, and among the top 10 world defense manufacturers, you have at least 8 US firms manufacturing. Obviously, there's a limit to manufacturing that can take place, and Russia alone facing the brunt of it against Ukraine, or the entire West against Ukraine. In a situation like this, in which over 50,000 rounds of artillery ammunition are fired every day, you can well imagine how difficult it must be to procure them, get them to the site, and then fire at the Ukrainians. And similarly, the assistance coming to Ukraine in billions of dollars of military aid from US to Ukraine. So Ukrainians are cannon fodder. Obviously, they're fighting a war for somebody as proxy against Russia, and the Russians are being shown their place as to where they belong to. And obviously, the fight is between the Americans and the Russians. Having said this, now the question arises, where and how does North Korea figure into the entire context? You can imagine if the Chinese at a point of time thought that the North Koreans, as good allies, as someone who the world had squat pariah and they were not to be neglected, isolated, were adequate to keep the Japanese and the Americans at bay. They also cultivated Pakistan to keep India at bay. So the top 3 economies of the world tomorrow, India, Russia, US and China, you find how China has kept the Americans and the Indians at bay with countries willing to play the card. At this point of time, you have the North Koreans. North Korea is obviously after COVID and the kind of isolation that North Korea has been facing, but have insisted on military manufacturing in a very big way. So the artillery ammunition which goes, and you saw the last meeting of theirs in September at Vladivostok. So there are train convoys that can take all of this ammunition into Russia without anybody. Iranians providing them with drones. Obviously, the Chinese are providing with all the necessary assistance to the Koreans or to the Iranians and whatever it may be. Well, not openly, but yes, Russia couldn't have possibly survived without it also coming to them. With the Russian manufacturing industries able to withstand, and as I said, fire 50,000 rounds per day. It's not a joke. For the last 3 years, that's the kind of firing that the Russians do on the Ukrainians. Where else do the Russians look at? The Russians have to see whether they're 198th or 199th or 200th in the economy. It doesn't matter, because the artillery ammunition which they desperately require comes from North Korea. What does North Korea want? Wow, on a grand stage today, they stand as someone with Russia. What do they give them? What do the Russians give them? Food. Russians give them foreign currency. Russians give them technological assistance. Russians give them nuclear assistance. And all of it, who are they scaring? Ultimately, the Americans. Yes. The intercontinental ballistic missiles which will be manufactured in North Korea, which they're crazy for. They don't care what the North Koreans are all about. They see what the South Koreans are doing. They see what's going on in the demilitarized zone. The kind of tension that are taking place between South Koreans and the North Koreans, the tensions between Japan, the kind of missiles being fired into the straits over there between Japan. So it's a very difficult situation. But yes, at this point of time, North Korea feels here they are on the center stage, the world looking at them, and nothing less than when, as you rightly said, 24 years back, Putin met the father of Kim Jong Un. If that be so, at that point of time, and today, here comes the son who's almost like a savior to the Russians, and all these pacts that you scratch my back, I scratch your hit, I'll hit you, the NATO pact that is happening over there. So it's a win-win situation for North Korea. It's a win-win situation for Russia. And of course, the Chinese are now concerned that their own proxies, a friend of theirs, are a little of a problematic because now they've gone closer to the Russians. And obviously the Chinese don't feel very comfortable.
That's exactly what I want to discuss and expand on in our next segment after this quick break.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
When we talk about India, unfortunately the country has the highest burden of road crash fatalities.
तो लगभग 76% लोग pedestrians और two-wheeler वाले हैं जिनकी डेथ हुई है. While the highways are getting better in India, the local roads, the city roads, the town roads, these need to be improved.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
One of southern India's largest cities is facing a water crisis in Bengaluru.
Water is constantly not coming. From past 2 months, we are not having some water also.
The citizens deserve water security at the very least.
We are going office without bath.
The acute water shortage really leading to citizens resorting to use of even private water tankers in multiple areas.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
This is News9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now go across to Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar. Ambassador Sajjanhar, we've discussed in great detail how the coming together of Russia and North Korea is not just based on an important transactional relationship that the two have forged, but also is, important messaging aimed at the West, led by the United States. However, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni brought up another interesting aspect in the previous segment, and I wanted to bring this up, so I'm going to put this to you. As close as China may be to both Russia and North Korea, there are many analysts like Lieutenant General Kulkarni who believe that China will not be too happy with the growing proximity between Russia and Russia and North Korea, I beg your pardon. They say that's because if North Korea does get better weapons and missile technology from Russia as part of this new agreement, then, it not only frightens the United States, it also worries China, because one, China would be concerned about what is being termed as a possible East Asian NATO, And because China does not want any more US warships in the region. Besides, China wants to continue doing business with the United States and with Europe, unlike Russia and North Korea, which have completely isolated themselves from the world and are treated as pariahs by the West. What is your take?
Yeah, thank you very much, Neha, and very sorry, my connection has not been too good this evening, but I'm delighted
to
be
have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I would tend to agree with General Kulkarni. I think it is, definitely China would be worried. China wishes to be a hegemon in the region. It doesn't want any competition. I'm not, for any moment trying to suggest that if North Korea gets all this technology and all this sophisticated equipment from Russia, there is going to be any sort of competition to China. But, these are its proteges. And these are, countries, even Russia, I would call it. Russia is truly, notwithstanding what 2 years ago it was said that it is a limitless partnership, notwithstanding the fact, you saw all those photo ops when Putin was in Beijing or when Xi Jinping had visited Moscow recently. Notwithstanding all that, China wants to keep Russia in its own place. It doesn't want, even as far as the fighting is concerned, it would also like Russia to be bled to the extent possible, but not, completely wither away, not completely disappear. And so that it stays there, but then it doesn't become a victor in this Russia-Ukraine conflict, so that, it can emerge as one of the, the giant slayers, the giant killers that it fought with by proxy with NATO, and it emerged victorious. So I think it is, that is why China would not want Russia to emerge such a strong, such a powerful country as a result of this conflict. And here also, I think Russia would share whatever, it has. It can give grain, it can give foodstuffs, it can give oil, it can give, other types of fuel and energy to North Korea, which is, it is an existential aspect for North Korea because it's a 25 million strong country. But both in food items as well as energy, it is, desperately in need of these items. So that will be given. And maybe some sort of technology. But I don't think, any sort of these missiles, ballistic missiles, and satellite technology will be imparted, will be shared. Because I think everyone around also realizes, in addition to the arguments that you gave, and a little bit of it I was able to hear from General Sanjay Kulkarni, that if North Korea becomes too powerful, then of course South Korea and Japan are allies of the United States, and United States will feel duty bound, and because of its alliance partnership, it would feel committed to send in more, strengthen their defense systems. But I think also it is that North Korea is a factor of instability. I think one needs to recognize that, whatever one might say about hypocrisies of the West and so on and so forth. I think even as far as India is concerned, we don't want North Korea to be developing these ballistic missiles. We don't want them to be, although we might be far removed from there. But what India also needs is peace and security and stability all around the world. And that is what, when Prime Minister Modi had told in September 22 to Putin that this is not an era of war. We don't want wars, not in which India is engaged in. We don't want wars and instability in the South China Sea, what China is doing, or in the Taiwan Straits. So also as far as the activities of North Korea are concerned, because, again, what we want to see is that the the most formidable challenge for India is China. And we would like the focus of the United States also to be on the Indo-Pacific to deal with the threat, with the belligerence, with the aggression of China in this region. So as soon as Russia-Ukraine conflict is over, so that the United States and the West does not have to expend its energy and focus on the Russia-Ukraine conflict or the Israel-Hamas conflict, so that they can concentrate, the United States, the most important military power, it can concentrate on the Indo-Pacific and start dealing with China. So this definitely would be our interest also, that, I'm taking that argument a little forward, that we would not also like the Russia-North Korea partnership to,
become too strong. Yes.
Too strong and to expand over sort of, technologies in defense areas, which would create instability in the region.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Ambassador Sajjanhar. I think you've made some very important and valid points. And I want to take this to Patikrit Payan. Patikrit Payan, you have a lot to respond to. You can criticize the West and the United States all you want. But Ambassador Sajjanhar makes an important point that North Korea is a destabilizing factor in the region. India does not wish to see any further instability either. And given the grave threat that China poses to us and our security, we do want the United States to play an important role in the Indo-Pacific to keep China in check. That's point number one. The other interesting argument that's been made by both the other panelists is this, that China will be as concerned seeing this growing partnership as perhaps the United States. North Korea is its satellite and Russia at best a junior partner. China is interested in establishing its own hegemony. It does not want Russia to become too powerful. And at the same time, it does not want another Cold War. It does not want more US warships in the region. Your response?
Yeah, first of all, my limited point is this. If the West does not want the countries like North Korea to get more emboldened and strengthened for the sake of global peace, then
Okay, now we seem to be having trouble with Patikrit Payan's line there. So let me take this question to General Kulkarni. General Kulkarni, Ambassador Sajjanhar completely agrees with you on the point that you made about how China is not likely to be happy with this growing alliance between Russia and North Korea. And at the same time, Ambassador Sajjanhar makes the important point that India will also be looking at this with a great deal of concern, because North Korea is, after all, a destabilizing factor. We know about its ties with Pakistan. And then, of course, one can hate the United States all one wants, but you do need the United States to keep China in check. And China is, of course, a country that poses a threat to India. Geopolitics, at the end of the day, is very complex.
Absolutely, Neha. Ambassador Sajjanhar is point on. There's no denying the fact. But the fact still remains. The strengthening of North Korea with the assistance of Russia, obviously the concerns are in South Korea, concerns are being felt by Japan, concerns are being felt by China also. Now you find resulting, these Americans start moving in South Pacific, Indian Ocean, entire area. It does. If our relationship with Americans grow over a period of time, at least, there's a check. And the deterrence has been created. The Chinese, much that they would want to do the expansionism coming towards Eastern Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh, there'll be a check on China. Because China knows for sure that these kind of relationships, because China is a manufacturing country. China wants a market. The Russians are crude manufacturers. As a result, they have technology, they have nuclear arms, they have military technology, and they have crude oil. So all of it is there. It's all there. They are not dependent. Others want what the Russians have. The Chinese want to give what they want to manufacture to sustain themselves. So there's a lot of difference between what the Chinese are wanting to grow in wealth at the cost of others. The Russians, just despite the sanctions, despite all of it, world wants the Russian crude. The world wants to ensure that the Russians don't use those 5,000 plus nuclear weapons that they have. The world wants that the Russians do not proliferate the kind of technology that they have, be it nuclear or missiles or anything for that matter. And here's a country like North Korea. No doubt, what do the North Koreans want? They've lived in poverty and the kind of things. But at this point of time, I look at it that Kim Jong Un was looking, even during the COVID time, the food crisis, here comes food from Russia. They were wanting technology, there comes technology from Russia. Now they're wanting foreign currency, there comes foreign currency from Russia. For all of it, for the conventional war between Russia and Ukraine being supported by the West and being pumped in. So you slowly, steadily you find that whatever the 18 or 20% of Ukraine that has been occupied by Russia, if that continues to be, only then would the war end. Otherwise, the war won't end. If the Americans think that they're going to get back what the Russians are occupying of Ukraine, then this is a never-ending proposition. That's not possible. So if the war has to end, there has to be some way found, and nothing better than to ensure that the Russians don't find that closeness to the North Koreans, and North Koreans can't be trusted because it's a totally different kind of a ball game in North Korea. You see the kind of military, take over. You see the kind of dictatorship. It's almost a single point contact, one family ruling for years on in North Korea. And South Korea, the kind of things that they do with South Korea, they can even throw trash on South Korea with balloons and whatever have you.
That's right.
You see the kind of behavior that they do at the demilitarized zone. I've been there in the DMZ and I see the kind of behavior that these two countries do. So, and the South Koreans don't want that. The South Koreans are doing very well on the economic front. The Japanese are doing very well on the economic front. The Japanese have decided to double the expenditure on military from 1% of the GDP to 2% of the GDP. They know the threats that are emanating in this region. So there's a lot that needs to be done. And obviously, you're right, the ambassador Sajjana is absolutely right. This is a destabilizing factor.
Exactly. North Korea is seen as a destabilizing factor. It is seen as a nuisance by multiple countries, including the US and South Korea. And many are also describing the Russia-North Korea relationship as a strictly transactional one. Patikrit, I'm out of time, but we had lost your line, so I will give you the last word. If you could just complete the point that you were making earlier when we lost the connection with you.
My limited point, Neha, is this: we are hoping from the same America to bid against China for us, which for almost half a century kept on funding and arming Pakistan against us. So yes, we are a strategic partner of United States. I have no problem with that. But if push comes to a shove,
enemy is my friend. Remember this famous saying?
I agree. So all I'm saying is this, Neha. The limited point is this: if the West is genuinely concerned to demilitarize and defang the countries like North Korea, then they have to be a little more sincere in terms of stopping the wars. I don't see that sincerity when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war. I don't see the sincerity when it comes to conflicts in Middle East. So when you keep on pushing one country and pitting one country against another, when you use proxies, the other side will invariably create coalition, whether we like it or we don't like it. I may say 100 times that North Korea is a problem. I may say 100 times China is a problem, but still the Chinese, the Russians and the North Koreans will keep on coming. We have to understand what is the reason. And where does China get all the funds to arm itself? It is because of the trade with the Americans, the $750 billion trade that they have with the Americans. The Americans want everyone else to do everything necessary to keep China at bay. But when it comes to their own trade, they will not budge, because that will increase the cost of products and goods in their own country. So I think the Americans need to be a little more sincere. I have no problem with America as a country. It's a great democracy. In large areas of convergence we have with the United States. But if you really want to demilitarize this world, create peace, you have to be, first of all, sincere. That sincerity, when it comes to Middle East and Ukraine, we are seeing a lot of
let's not forget that the wars that are going on in the world continue to feed into the monstrous military-industrial complex in the United States of America. That is another factor to be considered. At the moment, unfortunately, it does look like the Russia-Ukraine war is turning into an endless war, a war that nobody really wants. But on that note, Ambassador Ashok Sajjana, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, Patikrit Payan, thank you so much to all three of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, staying with some news on the United States, but with an India connection. Former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's in India as part of a bipartisan delegation of American lawmakers, met Tibetan spiritual leader the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala today. Hours later, she launched a strong attack on China and dismissed President Xi Jinping, saying, and I quote, "His Holiness the Dalai Lama will live a long time and his legacy will live forever, but you, the Chinese president, will be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything." She also said bipartisan approval for the Resolve Tibet Act, which US President Joe Biden is expected to sign into law soon, sends a message to China that Washington is clear in its thinking on this issue. This bill says to the Chinese government, things have changed now, get ready for that, she said to cheering Tibetans. The act is expected to put pressure on China to resume negotiations frozen for 15 years with the Dalai Lama and other Tibetan leaders. The US has long supported the rights of the Tibetan people to practice their religion and culture and has accused China of human rights violations in the Tibetan region that borders India. In a major contradiction, though, the US also considers the Tibetan Autonomous Region a part of China. Nancy Pelosi's stunning broadside not only boosts India's position against China, it also comes as US President Biden, as we said, is set to sign a bill which will press Beijing to resolve the Tibet dispute and underline Washington's intention to stop Beijing from intervening in the selection of the next Dalai Lama. This visit is significant because it comes as Washington and Beijing are actually working to improve ties between two of the world's economic and military giants. China has already expressed its displeasure. Beijing considers the Dalai Lama a dangerous separatist and has said it is seriously concerned by the American delegation's visit and the bill, which is going to be signed by Biden soon. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said affairs related to Tibet are an internal matter and that Beijing would take resolute measures to defend its sovereignty. The statement said, "We urge the US side to adhere to commitments of recognizing Tibet as a part of China." The US delegation, however, was unmoved. One member said China can express its unhappiness, but we are going to stand for what is right to make sure Tibetans have freedom, that they can return to their homeland and keep their culture and history. That is what is important.
I think the message is loud and clear to China, and whether they come here or not, also the message has been clear to China for a while, I think. You know, that freedom-loving nations in the world, people who promote peace and justice, they support Tibet, and also it's a strong message of support of the American Congress, the American people for justice and for the cause of the Tibetan people, and above all the high regard that His Holiness the Dalai Lama commands all over. And I would think in my own little ways that I think it can be seen as a support for India also.
Yet another provocation from Canada, but India has a firm response. Sending a clear message after the Canadian Parliament observed silence in the memory of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the Indian Consular General in Vancouver announced a memorial service to pay tribute to the 329 victims of the Khalistani bombing of Air India Kanishka flight in 1985. The Consular General tweeted, "India stands at the forefront of countering the menace of terrorism and works closely with all nations to tackle this global threat. 23rd June 2024 marks the 39th anniversary of the cowardly terrorist bombing of Air India Flight 182 Kanishka, in which 329 innocent victims, including 86 children, lost their lives in one of the most heinous terror-related air disasters in the history of civil aviation. A memorial service is scheduled on the 23rd of June at the Air India Memorial at Stanley Park's Kepali Playground area. We encourage members of the Indian diaspora to join the event in a show of solidarity against terrorism." The Air India flight travelling from Montreal to London in 1985 had blown up 31,000 feet above the ground when a bomb planted by Canadian Sikh terrorists went off. The 329 passengers killed in the incident included 268 Canadian citizens, 27 British citizens and 24 Indian citizens. The bombing is among the deadliest acts of aviation terrorism. Now, the Indian consulate's post came on the heels of the Canadian Parliament observing a moment of silence in the memory of Nijjar, who was shot dead outside a Gurudwara in British Columbia last year. The Justin Trudeau government has alleged that the Indian government and its agents could be involved in the killing. New Delhi has trashed the allegations, describing them as motivated and absurd. Bilateral ties between the two sides have since nosedived. Nijjar's murder is being investigated currently by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and 4 Indian nationals have been arrested so far. All right, our next story is on the Hajj pilgrimage, and this is grim news. According to authorities in Saudi Arabia, 68 Indian nationals died during the Hajj pilgrimage this year, marked by searing heat, bringing the overall death toll to over 600. They say we have confirmed around 68 dead, some because of natural causes, and we had many old age pilgrims, and some due to weather conditions. That's what we assume. The new death toll comes after 2 Arab diplomats said that 550 deaths had been recorded during the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam that all Muslims with the means must perform at least once. Now, this death toll includes 328 Egyptians, 60 Jordanians. Fatalities have also been confirmed by Indonesia, Iran, Senegal, Tunisia and Iraq's autonomous Kurdistan region. The total reported deaths so far is 645. Saudi Arabia has not officially provided information on the casualties, though it has been reported that there were more than 2,700 cases of heat exhaustion on Sunday alone. For the past several years, the Hajj has fallen during the sweltering Saudi summer. According to a Saudi study published last month, temperatures in the area where rituals are performed are rising 0.4 degrees Celsius each decade. All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.
There are beautiful golf courses, there are well-played golf courses, there are great greens. But I think we are a combination of everything.
Now, because of the nature-friendly atmosphere here, plenty of water.